The Supreme Court, after like the third or fourth time, I'm not even sure how many times it went back the Muslim ban to it, but after several times it finally passed. What made the Supreme Court pass that? How was that in any way legal?
Well, so the president has what we call plenary authority in immigration, meaning he has full discretion. In contrast to, say, Congress having its maximum power when setting the budget, right, or when taxing. So he can keep people out of the country. He just can't do it based on unlawful bases. So what happened is his first ban included people with green cards, included student visas, work visas, visitor visas. It included everybody except US citizens. And when it went to court, the court said no, you cannot, they have rights too, they have due process rights. And you can't just keep someone who, for example, went to Yemen to visit family, who has a green card, who's lived here for 15, 20 years, has a house, has a job, and say, now you can't come back in the country simply because you're from Yemen. Right? And just because I have the right to control immigration. And so the Supreme Court said, no, they have due process rights. And at the very least, you have to let them in. And then you have to go through the court system to determine that that particular individual is a national security threat, which of course they're not going to do because they're not a national security threat. So eventually it kept narrowing and narrowing to only people, for example, who got approved for a visitor visa. And so that got rejected. Right? People who had gotten approved for student visas but hadn't yet come. There were still some students who were caught abroad because the student visa situation was a little iffy. Similarly, if you had a work visa and you'd been working here, you could come in. And it depended on the country. Some countries, for example, with Iran, ironically, they did continue to allow the student visas to come in after the Supreme Court here ruling, and Trump let students from Iran come in, but he wouldn't let students from other countries come in. So ultimately, it was people who were non-immigrants, because if you have a green card, you're considered an immigrant. If you have a work visa or a student visa or a business visa or a visitor visa, you're considered a non-immigrant. You have a visa, but it's a non-immigrant visa. You're not, that visa is not for you to here to stay for a long period of time, right? So those were the individuals who ultimately the court said, yes, he has the legal authority to exclude them. And then the court turned a blind eye. And this is where the court got criticized by people like me and others, other legal scholars, where they turned a blind eye to the fact that this was based on them being Muslim. And they said, no, no, no. It's not necessarily based on them being Muslim because, look, it didn't apply to Saudi Arabia, it didn't apply to Egypt, it didn't apply, to Morocco. And so this really was the executive exercising their own expertise in national security, and we have to defer to them. We have to let the executive branch make those decisions.
And a lot of academic people who dislike Muslims or dislike Islam more specifically than Muslims use the term Islamist a lot. And I don't really know what that means. Like I don't hear it other than from these people that don't like Muslims, don't like Islam, and view it as a threat to democracy. What is an Islamist?
Yeah. I don't think there's such thing as an Islamist, but I do use the term political Islamist, and I think there's also something called a political Christianist. And effectively, the way I define a political Islamist or a political Christianist is someone who is politically engaged and their political engagement is shaped and defined by their religious beliefs. And as a result, their vision of a good society is defined in large part by their theological commitments. So that can include things if you're thinking about Israel. So you have political Jews as well, where they may say everything should be shut down on the Sabbath, on Saturday, because that's what God said, and we should follow God so that we will be blessed as a nation and that we will live a good life, and we should obey our religion. So it could be here where you would close down the businesses on Sunday. Like, so religious Christians who practice and observe the Sabbath, they don't work right on the Sabbath. It's only for leisure and relaxation. Same thing for Muslims. They say, although with Islam, actually, there doesn't seem to be it's more about you don't go to work, but we don't have in Islam the same concept that all businesses should be shut down and the entire society should shut down. It's more you shouldn't work. You go to pray Friday prayer and you relax, but businesses can still be open. But maybe for Muslims, it would be something along the lines of, everybody has to, all men are required to go pray on Friday. And if you don't, the state could punish you because it's mandatory, as opposed to what's currently the situation where if you don't pray on Friday as a man, you're not going to go to jail, right? Maybe you'll be publicly shamed by your family or you'll be pressured or they'll say you should go, but you're not forced to go. But if you're somebody who believes that the religion and the religious tenets should define the law and should define public policy, that's one version of a political Islamist or a political Christianist or a political Jewist, for lack of a better word. So it exists or a political Hinduist, right? And the reason why that's pejoratively used, political Islamist, is because the Western elite and the Western intelligentsia have two strong ideological influences. So the first is the secular liberal tradition, which has a strong aversion to religion being any part of public life or public policy or government. And that's not unique to Islam. That's towards Christianity, towards Judaism. And the second is they're very suspicious of Islam. They're very suspicious of political Islamists in particular. So that's a very unique bias that they have, where they might be not as suspicious of Jews in Israel who are on the far right, and they do exist and they have political parties who are actually fighting politically, not physically, but who are having major political disputes with secular liberal Israelis, Jewish Israelis, about how much Judaism as a faith should influence government and law and public policy. And yet nobody in America is saying, oh, they're really bad people because they want their religion to define their society. They might just say, well, we don't agree with them. But with political Islamists, and that's part of Islamophobia, that's part of this disparate treatment, treating them different than some other groups that are in the same situation. That if you're a political Islamist, well, you must be Al-Qaeda or ISIS. So Al-Qaeda or ISIS are a very, very extreme version of political Islamists insofar as they have a political agenda, which is to create this delusional caliphate, go back 1,500 years, which, majority of Muslims don't want. It's a minority perspective. And they do it through violence. They want to implement it through violence, through insurgency, through resistance. Whereas there's nonviolent political Islamists who will just say, no, we don't want to have a war. We don't want to go through violence. We don't even want a caliphate per se, but we do think that we need to have more morality in our society, more morality in law, and then that can affect how people behave, right? So whether it's banning smoking or criminalizing using drugs. I mean, why is marijuana criminalized? It has a lot to do with Christian faith, with religion. I mean, why is prostitution criminalized in America? Because prostitution is considered a sin in Christian religion. But there's really no other basis. Why do you criminalize prostitution and not criminalize drinking alcohol, which can be just as harmful? And there's all kinds of drunk driving is criminalized, but the drinking or getting drunk is not a crime, and yet it's so harmful, right? So when we ask ourselves, what's the basis for our laws and our public policies and the way we structure society, a political Islamist, a Christianist, political Christianist, and a political Judaist or Jewist would say the religion. You can disagree with that. I disagree with it because there's very real repercussions for women. Because if you take a very traditional interpretation of Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, and most other religions, they tend to perpetuate patriarchy, right? And so women end up getting short shafted. So I wouldn't support that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I would criminalize them. It doesn't necessarily mean that I would automatically put them in the same category as Al-Qaeda and ISIS.